Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Dodger, and I'm starting what I believe to be a trial run of a potential new series I'm doing on Magic the Gathering. But this time with a twist. We're looking at custom Magic design. Now, more specifically, what we're trying to do is we're going to be taking a specific custom Magic set that I find very interesting, and we're going to be doing and sitting down with about an hour-long discussion with that set's designer. Speaking of which, I have a sets designer right now. His name is Scribble. How's it going, Scribble?
Hey, Scribble. Yeah. Oh my God, it's clearly 2 a.m. in the morning. Hey, Dodger. This is Scribble.
Hey, so the set we are going to be talking about today is a set called Panxiou, um, which go ahead and take it away. What is Panxiou, and why should we care?
Cool. So, in a sentence, Panxiao is a Chinese-inspired people world full of animal folk that loosely follows, or is loosely inspired by the Journey to the West, which is the story of the Sun King
Mhm.
in a Chinese folklore tale. Um, that's it in a sentence. I've tried to be mostly faithful and respectful to those origins, while also trying to, I suppose, innovate in my own ways, just so it's not a complete retelling of that story.
Love that. Yeah. And, it's kind of surprising that this is a motif that WotC actually hasn't really explored in canon. They've obviously done Kamigawa, but they haven't done a set with like a real world Chinese inspiration. Um, at least, you know, more like dedicated to mainland China. But there was, of course, Tarkir, which was kind of based on loosely a bunch of different civilizations in the East, but nothing specifically on like Chinese mythology, which
Yeah.
Pancho does draw heavily from. Um,
I think with things like Eldraine, we've seen that they're willing to like touch on specific like reference points as well. So I feel like maybe that could come in the future. Like,
oh, it's definitely gonna show up at some point. Yeah, 100%. I mean, they even made the clearest proof of that to me is that they made the Chinese flavored starter decks specifically to like get more people trying the game in China. Um,
mm,
and they made entire planeswalker characters probably who would hail from whatever world WotC does in the future. But we're not talking about WotC. We're talking about this specific custom set. So what I want to first start off with Poncho is this is going to be this series is going to be focused on set design and you know taking a look at how these prominent custom sets came together. So first of all, why don't you tell me a little bit about what sets Pancho apart mechanically? What is the gameplay focused on?
yep. Okay. So I suppose we should like talk about where the set first came from, because that's where the mechanics came from.
Yeah, yeah.
So Pascal started design. Oh, is it like 3 years ago now? Was It first came from the first season of MSC Survivor, which is an event that's been hosted for card design every year in the last 3 years on the MSC server, and basically, for one of those challenges, I designed a mechanic which was called Pack. Um, and it was a pseudo ability or an ability word where a creature would have an additional ability if you controlled another creature that would have the same power. And the judges for that season did not like it. They didn't like the entry as a whole, and I was eliminated off of that challenge. But Dodger and Canterbury Egg saw potential in the mechanic and helped me to rework it to make it more of like a batching kind of mechanic, similar to Party. And that seemed to instantly fix its perception, and people started to really see something in it. So since then, I've developed the set to try and become centered around pack as a kind of alternative to tribal. I'm not personally that big on tribal because I think it's a bit linear. It's a bit too low hanging fruit in terms of build arounds. And I don't like that it doesn't do anything inherently mechanically. So pack was kind of my way of taking tribal but making it based around something that's mechanically relevant, which is
Yeah.
having identical powers among your creatures.
So
So
there's two questions I have kind of following off of that. Um, the first would be how important do you think it is that the same power is like more accessible than just like same creature types? Like, is that the most important part, or is it the fact that you can actually manipulate power by buffing or debuffing your creatures?
it was a combination of both of those.
Mm,
Because I was really striving to have an open-ended drafting experience with this set. Part of my goal for this set was to try and make as open-ended of a draft experience as I possibly could. And so while Pack came from the desire to have a mechanically relevant kind of tribal, um, really, in order to tie it in with that goal of being open ended, I really wanted to add as many kinds of power manipulating ways as I could into the set without it feeling overloaded,
mm,
so that people could, they if they wanted to go into the draft playing a bit safe, they could just look for identical numbers in the power slot on creatures and then pick those. Or if they wanted to be a bit more expressive, a bit more, take a bit more risk, they could take a bunch of cards from a bunch of different archetypes, a bunch of different powers, and then create a deck out of that using those power modifying abilities.
absolutely, yeah. And we'll get more into kind of how you can do that in the limited format later. Um, the first thing I want to highlight about Pack specifically is that different power numbers play differently, right? Um, And so we'll pull up a couple examples just to kind of show this off right now. And if you want to follow along, listeners, you can go ahead and open up the Plane Sculptors page for this set. I'll put the link in the description. So I'm just going to pull up a couple cards here. Um, so let's see, we got a couple cards in white with Pack 1, or with Power 1. They're focused around that archetype. We got one with Pack 2, and these scale all the way up from 1 to 5, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, so just as an example here, if I go into blue, we've got, let's see, there should be, oh yeah, so if you just look at a couple of these commons, right? Um, Heaven's Eyes is a 3 mana 1/1 that kind of builds its own pack at power 1 to start. And the 1 power pack archetype is more of, say, like a token swarm kind of thing, right? Based on flyers.
That's right.
Yeah. And if you look at like this card, Huolin Sanctifier, um, it allows you to build kind of a more aristocrats archetype in white black based on power 2. And then finally, if you look at this card, Venerable Loremaster, it kind of uh, allows you to build like a very slow pack archetype based on power 5. So um, basically, the big takeaway is that this is a very creature focused set, right? Um, And now let's go ahead and talk about the other mechanics in the set, because there actually are a fair number of mechanics. The first one I want to ask you about after pack is actually let's go with the other kind of most splashy one, which is these kind of demigod creatures that appear at uncommon and up. What's going on with these? These basically look like creatures, but with class abilities, classes from Forgotten Realms specifically. Why are these in the set? How did you come about them?
Yeah, so this mechanic was the last addition to the set in terms of mechanics,
Hmm.
because um, I finished my first round of commons with just the three other existing mechanics, and I was pretty happy with the amount of depth that they had, and I didn't feel like I really had room to add another mechanic at common. But then while I was designing uncommons, I thought, well, three mechanics or three major mechanics is a bit on the low end. I kind of want to do something a bit more splashy, maybe the higher rarities. And I kind of wanted it to be a bit more like more of a flavor centric mechanic rather than adding it specifically because I thought the set was lacking in terms of a mechanical area. And so initially, I was looking at some kind of enchantments that you would attach to your creature, and then once your creature does or fulfills a few conditions, then maybe the enchantment would transform into a creature, or the enchantment would transform and give your creature some kind of other buff to sort of symbolize like that journey that your creature was going through.
Hmm.
And I had phrased that as like the journey to enlightenment at the time. Um, but I couldn't really find a way to make it work well. Like I'm not really a fan of auras, like positive auras in general. I feel they're a bit swingy. They're very open to blowouts, but they're also open to winning the blowouts in both directions. They get removed and you're down, or they don't get removed and they steamroll the game. So I wasn't particularly a fan of those directions. But I liked the flavor aspect that I was going for. Um, and so at that point, I sort of, that was sort of when I started looking more into the reference of Journey to the West as a reference point or a basis for the flavor of the set. And I liked the idea of keeping that enlightenment kind of mechanic at Echo Uncommon and higher. And so the next most logical thing felt like turning those enchantments into creatures so that it was less swingy. Um, and then just representing them as gods or like individuals who then go through the process of enlightenment and then transcend into godhood,
Hmm.
which was sort of where I made my stance different from the reference material. Um, where in the set or where in Panxiou, like any basically anyone can transcend into godhood. And that's referenced by the creatures with the transcend mechanic, starting out as just regular monks or spirits or whatever, and then attaining godhood as you like feed into their abilities.
Got it. So I have two questions based off of this. Why do you also gain a +1/+1 counter with the ability? How did you kind of arrive on that? Um, was it just kind of like as a marker of where you are, or did you feel like power-wise it needed an extra buff?
Initially, I did not have that. It was just the ability that triggered and that gained an extra type. But I was pretty much designing this set through DMs with Canterbury Egg. Like we just refer to all of the cards that we designed for each other's sets, which I designed concurrently along with his Nangzhou and Bloom. We did those in DMs with each other.
Mhm.
And he mentioned that the gods felt a bit anemic, I suppose. You know, like where if you take one of them, so for example, Bai Long Ma, the white uncommon god is a 3 mana 1/3, and it's like by the time that it transcends into godhood, if it's still a 1/3, that feels a bit not godly. So he suggested maybe adding a +1/+1 counter to each of the transcend abilities, and then I ended up really liking that change. It made the limited environments where you would transcend the godhood feel a lot more impactful, and it allowed me to gate a bit more of the power behind the abilities in terms of the constructed aimed transcend creatures rather than having them just be big stats balls to begin with. Um, yeah, so I liked the change and then I stuck with it. I modified the existing designs to fit those.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. One thing I will note is that the power toughness changing also makes this kind of like a less fiddly version of level up, which I know has its fans, although overall was considered a failure by Wizards. So I think that this is, a nice way to kind of emulate that gameplay pattern. Finally, my last question. This is not super important, but like, how did you decide? I think if you look at most of the gods, if not all of them, you're kind of depicting their final form in the art. Let me just check a couple other ones. There's, yeah, this one looks like the final form too. So, like, how did you kind of arrive at that? Um, is it kind of just like you'd rather see people see the cool thing than the not cool thing, or?
Yeah, it was mostly based on that.
Mhm.
I figured, you know, if I just stick a regular bird as art for what would eventually become a bird god, then it would probably look a bit less exciting, less cool, or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
so part of it was that aspect. I wanted to sort of mirror the coolness of the existing canon gods, you know, like Theros and Amonkhet. They're all like the art is all very splashy. They're all obviously very powerful looking deities. So I wanted to kind of reference that. But then another aspect of it was I found a really good stash of art depicting characters from Journey to the West by the artist Feng Hua Zong, which I'm
Mhm.
probably butchering the name of.
Oh yeah,
And
I've used
used,
some of their art before too. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've used a lot of their art across the gods in this set, which was
Got it.
also another reason why I settled on Journey to the West as a reference point because they had so many great art pieces of the characters from that
Cool.
story.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's talk about, I guess, the three kind of support mechanics, or two other support mechanics. I think I may be making a bit of a mistake. So let's talk about first the return of Scavenge, and kind of the little twist you put on here. And I'll take a look at Black's Karen Courier here as an example. Oh, Carrion Courier as an example. Um, so we see the return of Scavenge, which was the Golgari mechanic in Return to Ravnica. Um, but you're kind of doing other effects along with the Scavenge. So talk me through why Scavenge, why this twist on Scavenge, and how it fits in.
Yep. So this was the first mechanic I decided to add after pack when I first started creating the set. Because I knew I wanted some kind of way of modifying power that would appear frequently as a mechanic. And at the same time, with pack incentivized the set to be very creature heavy, which would mean there'd be a lot of combats and things would end up in the graveyard a lot. And so Scavenge kind of tied those two together really nicely to me. I also chose also with pack the need to okay the need to give players the options to either consolidate their powers to keep their creatures in packs or to give them the choice to add additional like power boosts to their creatures because they think that's the right decision to break up a pack to make a single creature stronger. I wanted +1/+1 counters to be optional throughout the set, which Scavenge helps to do. You can choose to scavenge or you can choose not,
Mm-hmm.
which also influenced the decision to make all of the +1/+1 counter gaining abilities a may effect rather than mandatory, except for the gods. Um, but it also meant that I couldn't use +1/+1 counters as like payoffs. So I couldn't have like a creature that said, whenever you do this archetype thing, put a +1/+1 counter on me. I tried to avoid those where possible because I felt like that would be too confusing. There'd be too much going on with pack. So that decision led me to use keyword counters from Ikoria as more of a payoff to use in the place of +1/+1 counters where they'd normally appear in sets. And so that I decided to tie that in a lot with scavenge, where whenever you're scavenging creatures, those creatures inherently have a keyword, and then when those creatures are scavenged, they also pass that keyword on to the scavenging creature. And I thought that scavenge triggers was a natural extension of the mechanic, and I didn't want to just bring the mechanic back exactly as it was. I wanted to do something funky with it, and that felt like the most natural way to go about that.
I do like that evolution on it, yeah. And at higher rarities, you do other cool stuff with it. Like, for instance, I think there's a blue creature that clones the creature you scavenge onto. Yeah, Wanderer of Many. And there's some other stuff like that. Um, okay, so now finally, I want to talk about like the last layer, which is this is a pretty heavy multicolor set, and you've included a multicolor mechanic, which is kind of like Converge. It's called Wu Xing. Uh, why make it a multicolor set?
So the set didn't initially start out like this. Despite me having the goal initially of trying to make a super open-ended set, it was only really after I'd finished the first bat of commons that I realized I'm not really like fulfilling that role here. And then I thought about it and I was considering like existing canon sets and custom sets. And I really locked into Kahambo Old Dawn as as a kind of staple of what I would imagine of what I thought an open-ended custom set would be like. And I thought, like maybe including a lot of hybrid and a lot of fixing, like that feels like a really good way to enable players to make as many different decisions as they want, to curate their own experience in the draft. So I decided to scrap the entire bet of commons that I had and then redo the set with a more multicolor focus. So I added a hybrid cycle at common, a lot more gold. I added Goldbrid after I was encouraged to by Canterbury Egg and Time Spiraled, which I previously didn't like Goldbrid, but they've really sold me on this, and I'm really happy that I added it to the set. And since then, just yeah, the addition of fixing, like it has led to so many draft experiences where people are playing, two color combinations that aren't actually what the archetype is. They're just creating their own archetype based on cards that they pick up and synergies that they find. So many players now go with 3 to 4 color decks, just like adding 2 different synergizing neighboring archetypes together, or like 5 color decks as well. So it feels like it's hit that critical mass of like the highest different number of supported deck types that you can have.
Definitely. So when we're looking at kind of both Wuxing and Goldbrid, you sometimes see some effects that like look weird for the colors that they're in. For example, I'm looking at this blue common Thundering Wrath, which is a it's a blue card, but it says deals damage to some creatures. So like that looks weird at first, right? So let's talk about like Wuxing specifically. What is kind of the most Wuxing cards? They'll say some effects that look weird for the color that they're on. So kind of talk me through the reasoning for that.
Yeah, so Wuxing was designed as a bit of a counterbalance to hybrid for design space, where hybrid I was a bit restricted with because obviously you need effects that are in Pi for both colors, and that led to a lot of the designing in the set feeling a bit grounded, feeling a bit like forced into specific directions. And so, with the extra slots that I had for this mechanic, I wanted to sort of go the other direction and really just open up some new design space, do some things that you don't normally see at common or other rarities. And so, Wuxing, it is similar to Converge, but by having by gating the additional abilities behind a certain number of mana of color spent of mana to cast a spell. This means that you can introduce abilities that are not part of the spell's colors part of the pie, but still have them be in pie because you're forced to spend a certain number of mana, colors of mana. So for Thundering Wrath, for example, yes, you do need to spend blue, but because it's a 3 mana spell and the damage is gated behind needing 3 colors of mana, you are forced to spend either white, red, or black mana. And so that ability I see as pi in pi for any of those colors. So it's obviously it's not in pi for green, but if you were spending blue and green on the spell, in order to get that damage mode, you do need to spend one of the other colors that are capable of doing damage. So this kind of threshold meant that I could make some creative off the cuff spells with abilities that probably seem quite like when people first look at them. But I would like to say makes sense once you like actually sit down and play with the cards and think about like how you are actually getting to those abilities.
Absolutely, yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I already understood that, but just for like the viewers, I think it was a good explanation. Um, I really liked what you said about hybrid being a choice creating mechanic, or not really a mechanic, but like hybrid cards create choices for you, and so having heavy multicolor effects like Wuxing be kind of restrictive choices is a good counterbalance. I really enjoy that. I also enjoy how the Wuxing mechanic offers a lot more modularity and general design space compared to Converge, because Converge needs to have one effect that scales, whereas this you can just add effects on top of each other. It's a lot easier to do stuff with that. Um, Great. So we've gotten through kind of the general set structure, all the mechanics. I wanted to kind of dig into the limited environment a little bit because I know that was a huge focus for this set. Um, so the first thing I wanted to do is I want to just express how much I like a couple different cycles you've done in this set. The first one I actually want to point out down here. I'm looking at a card called Disciple of the Coil. I believe there is a cycle of cards at common that have an ETB where you either do something or you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And in general, there's just a lot of availability of the +1/+1 counter on target creature stuff in the set, but not in a way that it's like every creature's getting a million counters, but just kind of like you often have access to that if you'd like to set up a pack. That's kind of what it feels like to me. Um, and I think it's a really creative way of just kind of having that ability available a lot of the time.
Yeah, this was one of the first decisions that I sort of settled on in at common. This was one of the first cycles that I added
Mm-hmm.
to the set before really making much else. I decided I wanted to have this kind of cycle available as a starting point for how I'd support multiple kinds of packs or players playing like packs without drafting the specific creatures that have those exact powers. Inspired by, I think it was a cycle of commons in Fate Reforged or Dragons of Tarkir that did something similar.
Yeah, Fate
Um,
Reforged does this as well, but you have to put a counter on the specific creature. So it's either you get a
yeah,
bigger creature or you get an ETB effect. So yeah, there's a little more flexibility there. Absolutely. So for limited, you've mentioned that the set is meant to be open ended. So are there specific um, archetypes that players are also encouraged to draft, or is it more like kind of a cube like environment, like in some other custom sets?
there are definitely two color archetypes. I wanted to make the set to be open ended. I didn't want players to feel lost and like to feel forced to have to make their own direction. I thought that would be a bit overwhelming. So I have included two color archetypes as well. For
Gotcha.
people want to want a more supported draft where they can just focus on their own or making really synergistic decks rather than having to create their own directions.
Yeah. So
So
could you briefly just kind of go through all 10? Maybe just spend a couple seconds on each of them, and I'll hover over the relevant archons once I find
yeah,
them.
sure thing. Yep. So to start off, there are five pack archetypes in the set.
Mhm.
So there are five two color combinations that each have a pack number of 1 through 5. And each of those archetypes share a color with the neighboring number. So, for example, pack 1 is the white blue archetype, and that shares a neighboring color in white with pack 2. So, white has both packs 1 and pack 2. And I made that decision because that would be the easiest way to have players be able to conjoin pack archetypes. You can play a bunch of pack 1 creatures and a bunch of pack 2 creatures and then segment that with +1/+1 counters. Makes it really easy to bridge that gap between cards of different archetypes.
I
Um,
actually did not notice that, and I think that's really cool. It's really smart.
yeah,
Um,
it was not initially how I had the set, but then I thought, I probably want to make it a bit easier for players to do this rather than just hope that they do it. Uh,
yeah. So we got white blue. We got power one flyers, right?
yeah,
We got
not specifically flyers. It's more of
just
a
kind
go
of
wide.
gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like a token sort of thing. So for each of the pack archetypes, I didn't want it to just be, oh, this is pack 1, this is pack 3. Because that felt a bit too broad. So for each of them, I wanted to give them a bit more of a direction as well.
Mhm.
And I since pack is already kind of like it asks you to do something in the draft portion of the set. I wanted that extra part of the archetype to be something that's more focused on what you actually do in play rather than having to draft for it. So for example, so pack 1 is go wide, where it's supported by a play style of just flooding the board, playing a lot of cheap things. And then we've got pack 2, which is white black, is an aristocrats kind of archetype, where it's focused
Yeah.
on you playing with a certain play style where you are leading to your creatures dying. You wanted to play quite aggressive, so your creatures are dying in combat, and a lot of the pack abilities in the pack 2
Oh, here we go.
cards pay you off for being aggressive. Um, and for losing your creatures in combat, you get a lot of bonuses from death triggers. And some of those are only on your turn as well. So, for example, for Macabre Blaze Master, it really incentivizes you to attack and to lose your creatures in combat. Um, because a part of that reason as well is because with the set being so multicolor focused, it's very possible that players end up with a lot of greed piles, a lot of really slow over the top decks. So the lower power pack archetypes in particular are sort of there as a safety valve to punish those players for being too greedy and for not being able to respond to the earlier decks as well.
Mhm.
Yep, so that's white, blue, and white, black. Next, we've got pack 3 is black, red. So this is an archetype that's kind of inspired by one of your sets, actually, Cloudscape. It was inspired by the Amity mechanic, which is cares about two creatures attacking at the same time.
Mhm.
So this one gives you bonuses to all of your attacking creatures in in the pack. So it's kind of like an attack in teams sort of archetype. Um, the color pair was initially based on wolves, and I thought that would be kind of funny as like a you're attacking in a pack. Everyone in your pack is getting bonuses when you attack together.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, so this is another one of the aggressive ones. And then going up to pack four, that is red green saboteurs, which is a one that I've got a lot of funny looks at from players. They're like, saboteurs normally have like one power and they're evasive. Like, what's going on here? So for red green pack four, I made this a kind of trample saboteurs, kind of inspired by Ikoria's red green trample matters archetype. There are a bunch of like whenever you deal damage to a player or a planeswalker effects that aren't focused on like getting in low and being evasive and attacking as many times as possible. It's more about like just subtle payoffs for getting through with your big creatures, and then a bunch of early game to try and facilitate you to get there,
Got
while
it.
still allowing you to be a bit aggressive.
And
And then
then green
finally,
blue is pack
is
5, right?
yeah, that's it. So that one's just mostly just a ramp archetype. You
Yeah.
play your ramp spells early. You've got like a 4 mana 5/5 pack creature with as defender, unless it's in a pack, as a bit of more incentive for early game blocking while you build up with your over the top rampy creatures. Yeah, this one was a fairly standard archetype. Um, so this
Yeah,
this
this
is
one
usually
seems like the hardest one to support, most likely. Just because, five
um,
power creatures are not that common.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was in designing the set and the skeleton. It was definitely one of the harder ones to try and work, or to like work naturally, I suppose. So it depends a lot. Players often end up combining this archetype with one of the other archetypes. So combining it with red blue or blue black or black green. This often ends up being a three-color archetype. Partly because like if you're ramping, you have the extra time and mana to like be splashing other colors, but also it gives you a bit more early game as well, so you can defend and kill things while you build up for your over the top plays.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So let's go
Before I
over
go
the
into
other five quickly.
Yep. Yep. So our other five archetypes, they're not in order, so this one's going to be kind of
So
hard.
looking at blue black, it seems like some kind of graveyard strategy.
Yep.
Maybe.
Yeah. So blue black is a graveyard value archetype.
Hmm.
With pack sort of leaning it towards being more aggressive and proactive. I wanted a couple more control value archetypes. And already with creatures ending up in the graveyard a lot, this archetype just sort of benefits off of you putting things in the yard through milling, through combat, or whatever. It cares about you having a lot of high value targets in the bin, which is paid off by the blue black Archon, um, where it gets a lot better if you have a lot of high value targets in your yard rather than just like one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And
then
then
looks like
next,
for green white, we've got well, I know what the green archetype is from the Archon. It basically just wants you to have creatures entering the battlefield every turn, but there are a lot of payoffs for two or more creatures entering at once, or at a
yeah.
symbol in the single turn. Yeah.
So it's kind of like a standard creature fall archetype, but I wanted
Mm.
to make it a bit more flashy than that. So I made it like a second creature, sort of like we've got second spell, second draw before.
Sure.
It ends up being similar to Alliance in Streets of New Capenna with a bunch of like whenever a creature enters the battlefield for the second time in a turn abilities.
Hmm.
I wanted another aggressive archetype that wasn't pack specific. So this is sort of where I settled on that. It felt like the most natural place to go with a bunch of low to the ground white green things that the colors want to be doing.
Hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely. Let's see. I believe the other ones we haven't addressed. We've got a black green, which is I'm guessing scavenge focused.
Yeah, so this is a graveyard aggro kind of deck. It takes a bunch of the um, like aristocratic tools that Black already has from its other archetypes, and scavenge and mill and creatures dying in combat. Pays you off for having creatures die. It also, with green having the two biggest pack archetypes in pack four and pack five, I wanted green's other archetypes to be more low to the ground so that the skeleton of the commons wasn't just that every single creature had power four or greater. They wanted reasons for green to have creatures with smaller stat lines. So white green and black green, especially, were what I used to fill out those gaps.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then if we look at Luster Bloom Diviner, it looks like blue red is kind of a whooshing uh, five color in general archetype.
Yeah. So blue red is a funny one because this is also always the kind of archetype that I struggle with the most to come up with a unique direction for. I always end up on spell singers, and I hate spell singers because it's so overdone. So I
Yeah,
was like, I
most
really
sets
want
are
to do
like,
something.
yeah.
Yeah, I really
I
want to do something fun with this.
yeah. I feel
And so
similarly about most sets. Black green archetypes are almost always graveyard focused, or red white archetypes are almost always focused on combat. I mean that's okay, but it is a bit samey sometimes.
yeah,
And this
well,
is something new.
I apologize for my black green scavenge archetype.
Oh, you don't have to
For
apologize. I'm just saying, it can be annoying when you're designing a set and you want to make something unique, but it's like oftentimes it's um, what ends up happening is you just kind of settle into the the most common option because it makes sense. But when you do
100%.
get unique stuff like this, that's cool.
Yeah. So once I decided to add whooshing to the set, I was like, even though every color is going to have this mechanic, I want to have some kind of non-creature focused archetype. Because the set's so heavily creature focused, there are already so many creature archetypes. I really want one that's specifically not that. So blue red ended up being that. It gives you a bunch of benefits for your spell casting, with a bunch of commons like helping you to cast spells of any mana, of any color, or add spell or add mana of any color. I've got Brewmaster Brothers at common, which is an effect you normally see in maybe like blue, the kind of ability to tap to add mana to spend on spells. But I wanted to open that up to red because blue has a couple of those effects
Right.
already.
Find.
Um,
Oh, here he is. Yeah.
Yep. And the ability to add mana of any color to help facilitate your whooshing spells. Yeah, blue red just has a lot of fixing in general, a lot of ability to get to those higher whooshing thresholds. Um, and yeah, it's a bit of this is actually I think this is probably the slowest archetype of the set. It's either
Hmm.
that or blue green, the ramp one. But there are so many 5 mana plus spells in the set to help for design space in terms of getting effects that care about spending all 5 colors of mana. So
Oh,
this
yeah. That
yeah,
makes
this
sense.
archetype has a lot of the cheaper creatures to help you get there, and then a lot of the big spells as flashy top end.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I would just say I think this effect is like perfectly in pie for red. I wouldn't bat an eye if I saw something like this in a normal set anyway, or in your average set, I should say. Um, and now, finally, speaking of in pie for red, let's talk about your red white blink archetype in this set, and like why red white blink. What was your justification? Do you think red blink is like what's your opinion on that?
Oh yeah, this is the fun one. This was my favorite one.
Hmm.
Um, so I speaking of what you were saying before, I hate red white aggro. Um, I think every time I see a set settle on red white aggro as its archetype, I just sort of like I'm disappointed because it happens so often, and I feel like red white has such cool tools to be able to do new flashy things that every time it just settles on standard aggro, it's kind of disappointing.
I think,
Um,
especially if it's just like generic aggro, then it's
yeah,
very boring. If you're doing something like a specific thing while you're aggroing, then I'm usually more okay with it. But yeah. Um.
yeah.
So,
Um,
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So with the other archetypes that I had, I ended up having like a bunch of enter the battlefield abilities, and like I'm a sucker for flicker because it feels like a very open-ended archetype. You can sort of play it how you want. You can it's very easy to design for as well. Like any creature with an enter the battlefield ability is automatically a candidate for that archetype. So you can just have so many ways of supporting it without having to directly allocate card slots to it. And I am also a sucker for red value decks. I love playing red and I don't like playing aggro, so I wanted to sort of do something with it here. I'd already added a bunch of white flickery effects to get to synergize with those end of the battlefield abilities. And I didn't want to use blue because I'd done a white blue flicker effect archetype in a previous set. And that left me with red. And I was having a look through like red canon effects, and I was like, heat shimmer, like that's a fun one. But like it kind of sucks why is it rare? It's kind of just bad. So I made it common,
You actually
and I
have
gave
a you have a heat shimmer that gives you double triggers of enter the battlefield.
yeah,
Conquer Psyche,
yeah,
which is an
common.
interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah. People give me some looks for that. I've given myself the space to make commons a bit stronger in this set. Um, Partly because I want those the synergies to be available, but also like just as a general design philosophy, I don't like bomby, spiky, limited experiences. So I tend to make my rares try to more constructed focused, which often ends up with them being bad and limited because
So
they're
so
designed
by
physically to get around.
by spiky, you mean there's a lot of variance involved in single cards. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, yeah. Just to clarify, you're not referring to the magic persona spike.
Oh no, Spike is
Yeah.
fine. He can stay. Um, yeah. So yeah, I try to tone my rears down in terms of limited experience, and to compensate for that, to bridge the gap, I raise the power of my commons and uncommons to try and make a flatter power level where you feel less bad about getting blown out by a specific bomb.
Mhm.
And that led to things like Conquer Psyche, where I've taken a rare, I've moved it down to common, and then I've buffed it even further.
To be fair, heat shimmer I believe is an instant, as well as this card doesn't really offend me personally. I think when you make these cards that are these are sort of kind of high risk, high reward commons, and those should naturally be very powerful if you get the correct synergies off. So I have no issue with this card personally. Um,
yeah.
but it does seem like it could certainly lead to some very powerful combos, which is a good thing. Um, okay, cool. So we've gone over all the archetypes. Which one is your favorite archetype or strategy to play in this set?
I would say that red white is definitely my favorite,
Mm-hmm.
just because like I think it just feels really fresh. This is not the kind of thing that I'd normally get the opportunity to draft in a standard set,
Mm-hmm.
and so wherever possible, I try to include those in my sets. And this is just yeah, it just feels like a really good break from your typical red white aggro and blue red spell singer.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So what I want to do really quickly, because we are a bit short on time, is we each came with our top two commons for each color. We're just
Cool.
gonna share those, compare, do a little bit of discussion on that for limited. So you have yours prepared, right?
Yes, but I
Okay.
kind of want to hear yours first,
Sure.
just
Yeah.
so for
Yeah. I mean, you're the sets designer, so I'll share mine first, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong. Um, so, for white, I'll start off with that. My two picks are Student of the Elixir and Heaven's Eyes. Um, Student of the Elixir, I think, is just a very good all-around card. It's pretty much going to be playable in every deck because it's always going to contribute something to combat, and it does a lot of utility work in fixing up your packs, enabling synergies, and it even provides value after trading it away, jump blocking, or discarding it, being milled, etc. However, it ends up in the graveyard. It's cheap. It doesn't cost very much. It's just like I think you get a lot more value than you pay for it with Student. Um, the other one, Heaven's Eyes. I think this is just a really solid card at base. 3 mana for 2/1/1 flyers and gain 2 life is really solid starting point. And you can gain more life than 2 very easily. And this is also a great blink target. And there's plenty of ways to do that in the archetype we already discussed. It also enables. It's great for green white archetypes too, because you want to have 2 creatures entering at once. So it's a very powerful synergy piece in 3 different archetypes that also is just good on its own. So yeah, those are my 2 picks.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. That's part of the reason why Heaven's Eyes is in my top two of the White Commons as well. It
Mm.
just works for like a lot of the different archetypes, very open ended. You can pick it early and don't have to commit to a specific direction. Um, the other card that I'd pick as the top two in White Commons is probably Hermetic Meditation. So I'm kind of cheating by picking the removal spell.
Where am I looking here?
um,
Oh yeah,
uh,
yeah. This is a good removal spell for sure.
Yeah, just the ability to shut off an opponent's pack, or even just remove a specific creature from your opponent's pack, has just proven to be super important. Um, yeah, there's not much to say about it besides it's a good removal spell.
Yeah, definitely. I would say I'm not as sold on guard duty in this set compared to a set like Rise of the Eldrazi because you do need to attack people. But like for instance, if you're playing a deck with a lot of evasion, this is obviously a very very top tier card. Um, all right, so moving on to blue. Should I continue doing mine first?
Yeah, sure thing.
Okay. So one of my cards I've included here is Unbalancing Strike. Um, I may be overrating this card a little bit, but I think this is a very significant upside on Quench. Um, the biggest problem with Quench is mainly just being a dead draw later in the game, or you know, you you lose out on the most valuable time to use it by if you in case you decide to tap out for one turn or something like that. And I think that this kind of effect is always going to be useful, namely the lockdown, because it's going to take out a creature for 2 turns, which can be very useful in the kind of tempo strategies that you normally want to play counterspell anyway. So I think this is just a very very strong common. Um, the other card I want to mention here is Pilgrim of Many Provinces. I think generally decent statted Elvish Visionaries are usually good in limited. This one is a 3 mana 1/3, which is great stats for a Visionary, and it also lets you do an additional rummage, which can set up your scavenges or stuff like that. So just like a lot of filtering on a solid body.
Yeah, Pilgrim is definitely on top performer. I would say my top two are Unbalancing Strike for the same reasons that you said. Just being
Mhm.
able to turn your early game quench into a late game relevant effect is really nice. And my other top one would be Blossoming Hatchling. Blue is actually the
Sure.
slowest color in the set, so having like a more offensively slanted Sailor of Means is not like the most relevant thing, but the 2 power makes it quite good at blocking as well, and being able to skip turn 4 and go straight into your turn 5 for your ramp. 5 is also the breaking point for a lot of the whooshing spells. It's just really well situated in terms of being able to breach you to that late game.
Yeah, this was my runner-up. So I think we're pretty aligned.
Sweet.
Uh, so for black, my first pick is actually Carrion Courier. Um,
Okay.
I think the +1/+1 and flying available on the scavenge for only 3 mana is really high value. There's a lot of ways to get this into the graveyard via I think there's some cards that let you sacrifice creatures in black and green, and also a little bit in white maybe. Maybe I'm misremembering, but um, there's some surveil effects, there's milling, and also like 1 mana 1/1s need less and less justification, or sorry, 1 mana 1/1s with flying need less and less justification to be played in sets with this many ability like ways to buff them. This is a great target for both receiving +1/+1 counters and for later giving them to your other creatures along with flying.
Yeah, 100%. I think this card does is a lot better situated than the almost identical blue card in Midnight Vow. Except that was one that had Disturb rather than Scavenge, but besides that, is functionally identical.
Oh, the blue one, yeah.
The Lantern Guide or something.
Yeah. This is actually Lantern Guide, but I think it seems a lot better in this set than in Crimson Vow, which it wasn't bad in Crimson Vow either. I mean, I like that card a lot. Um, and my other pick is Jade Empire Outlaw. Um, personally, I feel like just like similar to Pilgrim, like for a 1/3 body for 3 mana, Surveil 2 is about the same as drawing a card, and this one has Death Touch. So, it's gonna shut down pretty much all early aggression, while also giving you value. So I don't know. I think this card's really solid.
Yeah, Outlaw is definitely up there, especially with the fact that there are a lot of or not fight, but bite effects in the set, and
Hmm.
this proves to be a really good target for your multicolored decks looking to save off early aggression while also being able to kill like the late game stuff with those bite effects.
Absolutely.
I think black in particular, there's a lot of quite strong commons, so you could pick really anything for your top two, which is why mine are different from yours.
Hmm.
So one of them is Free from the Coil, just as a soul salvage that has additional late game tempo. You don't have to tap out for your late game spell to refill your hand and then potentially miss out on being able to cast things.
Yeah, this is
It
like a
also,
fantastic turn 5 play, and it's not that hard to
yeah,
get 3 colors.
yeah. I didn't want people to be too greedy with their soul salvage in waiting for to have two big targets in the graveyard before you cast it, because I felt like that would often be an incorrect decision due to the
Oh,
tempo that you give up. So I wanted to incentivize people to also return something cheap, which is where the whooshing effect comes through.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. The other comment I would put for black is Weeping Yalgai. It's just a very well positioned, efficient creature that plays into all four of the black archetypes.
Oh,
It gives you pack 2 with itself. It gives you pack 3 because it gives you a 1/1 that it can later scavenge into. It has scavenge, so it is good for black green graveyard aggro, and it helps with your blue black value control deck because it gives you two early game blockers with a decent amount of power to be able to kill attackers.
yeah. I think this is interesting. I mean, this card wasn't really on my radar, but worth noting it currently says that it makes a 1/1 spirit, so it doesn't seem like it comes with a prepackaged pack of two. But I mean, I think it would probably be too good if it was 2/2/1s. I think.
But not, yeah, not specifically that it creates its own pack, but if you have any
Oh
other two
yeah,
power creature with
sure,
pack, then
sure,
it
sure,
stands
sure.
out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so in red, um, my first pick is Petal Blade. I think it's just a very efficient removal spell, especially considering how there's plenty of aggro decks in this set, and it even ramps you, which is I think very important. Um, my other pick is, I believe, Ancient of Reflections. I think snids are I forget what I think it's a snid for a 5 mana 3/3 flyer. They've kind of they've kind of fallen off a little bit. We're even getting common phantom monsters now. But I think this is a very significant upside, like getting a free ETB trigger on one of your other creatures, or attack trigger or whatever. I think is very powerful, um, and I think this is just a really good card.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a staple of the red white flicker archetype.
Yeah,
Um,
but I think
so
any
I'd say
deck would probably be happy to play it.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I would say my top two are Petal Blade, same reasons as you said,
yeah.
but also Moonscar Tuzi, which is just a staple of the aggressive decks available. This is like a real
Oh, sure.
centerpiece in specifically Black Red Pack 3, but also just like any attack, any 2 or 3 color deck that wants to push aggression to punish your greedy players. It's just proven to be really effective.
Absolutely. All right, and then last but not least, green. My first pick was, green actually I found the most difficult to pick out two standouts personally. Um, the first one I picked was Kinsang Butcher. I think that this card can grow to be pretty big, and the basis of like being a 2/2 that ramps you and then maybe grows bigger later can be pretty strong. There's plenty of ways to like make random dudes that you just sack to this, and it has modularity with either fitting into your 3, 4, or 5 packs. Obviously, green doesn't necessarily want to do 3, but you can do that too. Um, so I don't know. I'm not exactly blown away by this card, but I don't think there are really any super green standouts. The other one I included was Canopy's Claim because green obviously likes the two creatures at once, and having that come with a free nuke for a flyer is just like a nice failsafe.
Yeah, I agree with you with these two picks. Cannabis Claim is obviously just a very like high floor with additional versatility if you need it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kinseg Butcher is actually quite good in a lot of the 3 color decks, particularly Abzan. The sort of combination of the Aristocrats Enabler with your Graveyard Aggro in black green, and just the ability to reach those higher pack levels while also helping ramp you there with the treasure token if you need it. It fills a lot of holes that
Huh.
a deck might want.
I'm actually really surprised how much overlap we had in all of our common picks.
Yeah, a little
Even
bit.
yeah, even in green we overlapped both, which is I would not have guessed that would happen. Um, all right, so I have just a couple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pick out some cards from the set. I'm just going to ask you about them. Um, so we're gonna go up in rarity. The first thing I want to do is talk about the shrine setup. Um, so I believe this set has shrines show up and in the basic land slot. Um, and
Uh,
we
not
have the
100%.
oh, not 100%. Sorry.
Yeah. So every pack has a land. There's a 60% chance that it's a common, 30% chance to be uncommon, and 10% to be rare.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so there's like a specified land slot, and lands don't show up outside of that slot.
Hmm.
Okay, and this is all. So most of the time, it's gonna be one of the 10 shrines, basically.
Yep.
Is the idea? And then there's also Wayfarer's Shrine showing up here. Is this weighted the same as the other 10?
Yeah, equally weighted.
Okay, cool. So I that gives this. It's not going to show up as much as I thought. So that kind of squares away some of the like why this that common question that I had. So that pretty much answers that, I would say.
A lot of
Um,
people have that question.
yeah. So next up, I want to talk about Terracotta Horde. It's a 6 mana 5/5 artifact creature. It costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control that's in a pack. I really like this card as kind of a payoff for doing a thing in like a bunch of different archetypes that kind of functions very differently. In some of those, it's like for instance in green blue, this is like another addition to your pack, whereas in blue white, this is like a cheap payoff um, for getting a really big pack. So my question is, how do you arrive at these stats? Like why 6 mana 5/5? Because there's a lot of different ways you could have taken this kind of thing. It could have been the 4 mana 3/3 or something like that.
Well, I wanted with the colorless slots just to be like have as many of them fit as many different decks as possible.
Hmm.
And one of the struggles that I found with my pack setup was, if you're going to have two colors that all neighbor an archetype, or a pack number going from 1 through 5, one of your colors is going to have pack 1 and pack 5, which is a bit awkward in terms of like having neighboring synergy and the ability to like cross between packs. So this one specifically was kind of to help blue out, because blue has packs 1 and 5. And there's not too many ways of flicking between power 1 and 5 besides like toughness and power switching effects and whatnot, which one of the archons has. So this one was there to help your decks that have both the blue 1 power creatures and the blue 5 power creatures. It rewards you with cheaper costs by having your 1 pack creatures out, but then it also helps you facilitate your later game 5 packs.
Huh. All right. Yeah, I actually would not have guessed that specific line of reasoning, but it makes so much sense. I also want to just shout out a couple of these common artifact creatures that show a lot of the different ways that you can naturally build in pack uh, flexibility. Both prototype Rice Thresher, being able to kind of like fit in however you want, or Jade Sentinel, kind of allowing to scale up to some of your bigger numbers. I really like how both of those do that in different ways. Um, okay, next up, I want to talk about, let's see, pull up Divide and Slaughter. This is probably my favorite take on a Doomblade variant that I've seen in custom for a while.
Uh,
And even when you compare this to like, we've been getting a lot of Doomblade variants in canon recently. Um, some of them I'm a fan of, and some of them I'm not a fan of. Like Power Word Kill is one that feels weird to me, but I really love how this is actually a little weaker, and it's going to be off more of the time. Um, so like, was this? I mean, I guess I don't really have a question to ask about this, but like, was this um, something that you like had in the file for a while, or well, like how did you come up with this?
this was one of the first cards that I added to the set, actually, or at least one of the
Gotcha.
first ones that survived the first iteration, like the overhaul. Just with like sets naturally having like Doomblades, except it misses set mechanic or set theme
Yeah.
happening. I knew I wanted something similar at least. So this was a pretty staple effect that I wanted to include from the
Well,
beginning.
the funny thing is, um, kill spell with set mechanic is common, but actually Doomblade variant with set mechanic is actually not very common. It's common you get Doomblade variant with like set gimmick, like ultimate price in Return to Ravnica, that's that kind of thing. But um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. You don't usually see stuff like this specifically, so I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it was kind of
Um,
inspired by what Go for the Throat and
sure. Yeah, it's like
Last
that
Down,
kind
I
of
think is
thing.
the Dominaria one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's see. Next up, I want to talk about the cycle of rare scavenge lands.
Hmm.
Um, so these went through a lot of iterations. If I remember correctly, they originally they were typed and they had abilities like double strike, trample, etc. And when you animated them, you just they just became permanent creatures, and you didn't have to pay the cost again. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. This cycle went through a lot of changes.
Yeah. So now they have scavenge. So why did you arrive at this iteration? What's the reasoning here?
Yeah, so with the initial one, it just you're having dual typed creature lands that you could tutor for. I ended up just realizing that they were just way overtuned. Like they would obviously see play, but that's just because they were just ridiculously powerful and consistent. Um, I tried a bunch of different iterations of creature lands because I knew this cycle wanted to be a creature land. And from my first submission to MSCM2, I got some feedback that it just the council wasn't a fan of the directions that I was taking. And so I went through the set to see if there was anything lacking that I could sort of put here. And I realized that there wasn't that much scavenge happening at rare. And so using Animus tech that exists in MSM already by having printed power levels on the lands, I spoke with Cajun who said that scavenge works without any other fiddling around, just with Animus lands. And I thought, you know what, like this is not something that any other set is going to be able to utilize in terms of design space. So I'm just going to snatch that up and do something fun. Maybe try and push for a more aggressively slanted creature land because I know like oftentimes like with the high mana costs, those kind of cards want to go in decks capable of getting to higher mana ranges. So being able to incentivize getting your creature lands into combat and dying off so you can scavenge them later, I felt like that was a bit of a unique space to work in.
Yeah, it's kind of like the vehicle effect of those cards still having power, even if they're not
Yeah.
creatures. Um, yeah, I mean, I enjoy where they ended up. So let's talk Spirit Blossom Shrine. So this is this is a card I designed.
Sure is.
Yeah, I believe I came up with it just like literally randomly. Designed it in the space of like 5 seconds and posted it in your Discord channel for working on the set. And I said, hey, if you're interested in this, you can run it. Um, so why don't you tell me a bit about why my design is so great that you decided to include it?
Actually, I meant to cut this from the set, but I forgot.
Oh no,
No,
I reminded you.
no, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, it's just a really clean effect, you know. And just the fact that it references pack without specifically saying pack, I just thought that was really neat. I really liked the idea of adding color among creatures you control to sort of add that as a bit of symmetry to the fact that it cares about the power of creatures you control. So it's just like a really symmetrical, clean design. And I wanted to have a colorless land at each of the different rarities to match the 10 duels cycles.
Right, the
And so this
Wayfarer's
just
Shrine.
really
Yeah,
well fit.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thanks for stroking my ego a bit. All right. Let's talk. I'll do a couple more one-offs, and then we'll do some cycles. So let's talk about our boy Monk of Mid Autumn. So this is clearly a reference to Knight of Autumn. And I like this design a lot. I just actually this is more of a complaint. I
Uh-huh.
really wish this card was called like Monk of Summer or something, so we could do like a 4 card cycle of Knight of Autumn, Monk of Summer, something of Winter, something of Spring, something like
You're a
that.
genius. You should have voiced this to me earlier. Shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I ended up settling on mid autumn because that was just a thing in Chinese culture. Mid autumn
Oh.
festivals, and it appears throughout the set. So I thought, you know, it's a fun reference to Night of Autumn. I could see it going the other way of going with all 4 seasons.
I didn't expect there to be such a good reason. How dare you use the actual source material as inspiration instead of just trying to get these cheap naming conventions going?
Yeah, everybody's trying to head a
Yeah.
festival of summer. I don't know. Maybe it does. I haven't.
There's probably something. I mean, everyone celebrates stuff in summer. So right next to Monk of Midon, we actually have Master Tzu, martial artisan, who's clearly a reference to Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War. He's a very prominent character in the flavor texts of this set. Um, are there any other like kind of famous Chinese references that I'm missing here beyond this guy,
No, that was the inspiration.
the big one?
Yeah, he appears in a lot of the flavor texts, and each of those is a reference to one of the quotes from the book, The Art of War.
Hmm.
It was funny because in this slot I actually had a card called The Art of War. Um, because I found really good art for it, and I was like, I really want to make this work. It's a great reference. And then Canterbury Egg told me that he had a card planned for his set called The Art of War, and we were going to be submitting together. And I thought, yeah, okay, that's enough incentive for me to try to do something else. I don't want to, butcher the same design space. So instead, I decided to make a character referencing the actual author of it.
Okay, that's. I mean, I like this implementation more actually, um, personally. Okay, let's talk about Crane Cliffside.
Yes,
So
your boy.
this is part of one of the most bizarre mega cycles I've ever seen, which was something that I kind of inadvertently started, I guess, or Egg technically started it, but um, for those who aren't familiar, there was a card in Campbell Old Dawn called Parrot Pools, which turned out to be very very powerful when played in uh, the custom constructed format MSCM. And I loved it so much that in my first set I ever designed, I made a reference to parrot pools because the set I was designing featured a lot of birds. So I made a card called Vulture Valleys, which was a similar enchantment with like a trigger to make a bird and then a trigger when you hit some people, except it was black green, whereas parrot pools was blue red. And then we've seen kind of people making more versions of like alliterative bird enchantments in all the other colors. Um, and now we have Crane Cliffside in blue green. So, where did this card come from? Basically, is what I'm asking.
Well,
Like,
I knew in a multicolor focus set I wanted to try to continue that cycle, and there weren't that many color pairs left that hadn't been designed for. Um, and I was kind of getting to the stage of I was sick of designing for green blue. I was just running out of ideas for it because I'm a Mardu simp. I do not like Simic. I just didn't know where to take it. And it was designed after my blue green god Daigui, which creates a crane token on ETB. It's a bird that adds mana of any color because I wanted it to work for a rampy kind of over the top deck.
oh,
And I
so you
thought,
get
you
to
know what,
reuse
I've
the
already
token.
got. Yeah, I was like,
Yeah,
I've already got the token. Rather than find more art, I'm just gonna reuse the same thing. And then the other effects came from there.
yeah.
It felt natural to untap your creatures on combat damage when they all had a tap ability. And then wanting to go into a rampy deck with expensive creatures, it made sense to be a trigger that cared about creatures in some way. And being blue green, having a lot of draw for your creatures, that's just where the trigger came from.
Awesome. Okay. So, let's see. I got one more specific card I want to talk about, and that's Celestial Banishment.
Sweet.
I think this is probably the one effect that people look at, like of all the Goldbird effects, and go like, huh? Um, so what this is it's a stifle. Can't lands obviously, but if you counter if you counter an ability of a permanent that's in play, it actually gets rid of the permanent. So it can be a removal spell that actually counters the ETB of a creature, for example. Um, do you feel that this card is appropriate in Pi for green black because it can be played for either blue black or green black?
Yeah, that was actually my philosophy for all the pretty much all the good Goldbridge slots was I had Scryfall open and looking at a list of cards that were hybrid in the specific color, and then I tried to match that effect with some sort of staple or classic effect in the main color.
Hmm.
So there is hybrid green blue effects which stifle. I think repudiate or something is a split card from Ravnica block. But there have been a couple of effects where we've had hybrid green blue stifle effects, which makes me think that the first ability, the countering, is fine in Pi there. And
Yeah.
then,
So
yeah,
green stifle actually the precedent comes from a very old card. Um, there was originally a card that countered activated abilities of artifacts or triggered abilities of artifacts. And then I think they made like one or two cards, maybe just one card that was like counter any activated ability in green. And then since then, it's like it's been weirdly referenced as like might be okay in green by Marrow, but I don't think they've ever really hard committed to that outside of hybrid. So for the purpose of designing a gold grid thing like this, I think it's certainly fine. Um, I would certainly, I would certainly have some questions if you printed this as like just a green black card, though.
yeah.
If that makes sense.
Somehow, even though hybrid has less design space than two color, or Goldbridge has less design space than two color, like it makes more sense when it's yeah.
I think because of the nature of hybrid, it's like more acceptable when you do little bends like that on a hybrid card
Yeah, for
than
sure.
on a monocolor card. My other question is like, why doesn't this hit Why doesn't this tuck artifacts? Like,
It, it yeah,
what's
it
the
initially hit
rationale there?
any non-land permanent.
Yeah.
And I was using a spell from DOA, one of Pipsqueak's sets, that had a similar effect in blue that countered abilities, and if an artifact's ability was countered this way, it tucked the artifact. But after rigorous feedback and getting berated for it, we decided that that was not actually in Pi for blue. So if you were casting this for blue back, to be able to tuck artifacts on the bottom, whereas like everything else, all the other types are things that black can kill
Oh,
immediately.
I see the rationale. So you can't blue can't kill artifacts. Tucking is basically like killing. Black can't kill artifacts. I see. Okay, fair enough.
Mhm.
All right. So we're going to talk about the gods, specifically the mythic ones,
Sweet.
and their accompanying cycle. So you have five of them. They're in they're in two color pairs, and they're not like all ally or all enemy. So my first
Okay.
question is like, why these color pairs?
So they're actually the pack color pairs.
Oh,
Um,
okay. That answers my
that
question.
was no, it doesn't answer your question actually because that was not done intentionally.
Oh.
It was complete coincidence.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I started designing a couple just based on like ideas that I thought could be cool to turn into a god kind of effect. I started with Xiao, the Sun King, and then sort of went along from there. I knew I wanted at least them to be color balanced, but besides that, I didn't really have a preference.
Yeah.
And then I made Shanjun, white black, and then the cycle sort of filled itself out from there, and it just happened to end up in the same pattern as the pack archetypes.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's see. My next question is in universe, are there more than these five as like mythic level gods? I.e., is there a chance we ever see the other color combinations?
Yes, and yes. Actually, I have the sequel set on the back burner.
Okay. Cool. So we got the Theros inning ready.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
that set will have the five pack archetypes return, but with the five colors that didn't have pack archetypes this time.
I like that. Okay. Cool. Um, So I do want to talk about Shiho a little bit. He's probably the most high-profile card in the set, both from a power level perspective and from a story, because he is kind of the main character
Yeah.
of the story. So uh, I think everyone can probably assume that this card was designed to represent the mythical character Sun Wukong. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So was this kind of like a top-down design mostly for that character, or was this a card already and you like kind of decided to uh, turn him into Sun Wukong, or what? How is the process like for that?
Oh, it was definitely top down. I
Yeah.
tried to pay reference to the actual character in mythologies kind of skill set. Specifically, I started with the idea of using like shadow clones as one of the abilities that he is known to have in his media. And then I sort of tried to work to support it from there. So the first ability that I came with was the God one, where it transforms into two Planeswalker copies of itself. I checked with Cajun, and it was okay with a lot of CR fiddling that we needed. Yeah. Yeah, then I just sort of filled in the other abilities to accompany those. Actually, through the design of this card, starting with that ability, I ended up coming up with a sort of story beat where he does his invasion of heaven. He's sort of not happy with how the mortal realm is being treated by the people in heaven, or the elder dragons, celestials, the gods in charge, and all that.
Mhm.
And so he goes on a campaign to try and like say, "Hey, this ain't cool. Let's fix this up." Um, and then the black elder dragon is like, "Nah, we're not gonna have any of that," and then banishes him. Um, but what happens is the banishing spell misses, and it hits one of his shadow clones instead. And so that clone gets transported off plane to somewhere else, and it sparks the clone itself, not actually him. Um, and then when the clone expires, it ends up converging on his location so that he gets ripped away from the plane and transported off world. So he is not a planeswalker in himself, but his shadow has the ability to. And if he wants to planeswalk, he needs to summon the shadow, send that to another plane, and then switch places with it.
Wow, that's actually utterly fascinating.
There's a lot going on there. It was just
I
probably
had
not
no
super well
idea.
mechanically, but
I had no idea that it was that detailed, but actually, like that's really I really love that. Probably my favorite Spark story for a custom Planeswalker.
oh, thanks. Yeah,
Definitely.
I just really wanted to justify why he was not a planeswalker and his backface instead was the planeswalker.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so speaking of Planeswalkers, we're not going to talk about all of them. Um, you have one new Planeswalker and then one Walker that's kind of like a copy of a character that is not that well known. Um, you have two planeswalkers that are one is a a common canon one, a Johnny, and the other is probably the most well known, or at least the one with the most cards, custom walker, which is Xiong Mao. So
Mhm.
when it comes to designing cards for well-known characters, what are the challenges involved with that, and how do you feel about how you captured the characters of Ajani and Xiong Mao?
Um, so with a journey, I actually wanted to take a bit of a different direction, because I know his kit is always focused on caring about your other stuff, you're the creatures, you're the planeswalkers, rather than caring about himself. And the story beat I wanted to capture with Ajani in this set was more of a journey inwards, where this sort of takes place after Theros block in the story, where he's turned up to help Elspeth and the people of the world, and he's just lost Elspeth to Heliod, and so he's feeling betrayed. And there have been comments on that plane from the stories about his focus on other people's journeys rather than his own. And I wanted to take that to heart with this design here by having him come to Panxiou and sort of have a journey inwards, where he focuses more on himself, which is why his kit as well is more focused on himself finding balance, which is what comes from the passive ability of, it's kind of a top-down representation of balance where you have protection from what you're focusing on and that sort of thing. Yeah, so a bit different. I like to think that the blue comes out a bit more and is justified here, which is a color that he's not normally associated with.
Yeah, actually, my favorite part of this card is definitely the ultimate. Um, I really love because it's a great reference to his original ultimate, which is one of my favorite Planeswalker ultimates. The original Johnny Goldmane makes a token with power and toughness equal to your life total, and it's meant to represent like the avatar of the player. Um, and here he brings out the avatar of himself, kind of. So
Yeah.
I like that version a lot. Um, and then for Jiang Mao, there's definitely less like flavor um, overlap with this character in the custom verse, just because custom characters are not as well developed as canon characters. Let's be real. So like, how did you go about designing Xiang Mao? Um, what role does he play in this set?
Yeah, he was actually a really tough one to design for. I tried it. I made a couple attempts early on, and then I was just like, I hate all of these. So I left it till pretty late on. Um, and then I just ended up trying to take some of his staple effects that are common throughout all of his designs, which is like often about creatures in graveyards, sacrificing, caring about what the power of creatures. He normally like sacrifices creatures to gain loyalty or draw cards or gain life based on their powers. But so instead, I tried to go in a bit of a different direction. So this is like it's kind of like a aim to be a kind of Gideon ally of Zendikar, I think is the name of the card, which is like sort of just like a generically good card rather than like a specific build around, I suppose. He's
Yeah,
good with just creatures in general, but he also lends himself to a bit of a toolboxy vibe. Um, yeah, wasn't anything specifically like plot or set specific that this design came from. I just wanted to make a fun, good card.
it's fair
Canterbury
enough.
Egg
Yeah.
mentioned that people keep designing Zhong Mao's and people get hyped up to play with him, and then the cards end up sucking. So I just I just really wanted to try and make a playable Zhong Mao, I suppose.
I don't know. Personally, I think this card seems very strong to me. I think this card should be seeing MCM play.
Yeah,
Um,
I was a bit sad that it didn't make Purple Murasaki's Jund toolbox pod deck last year
yeah.
because
Well,
he
that's
feels
very that's very
fantastic with
creature
that.
focused. So
Yeah.
um, yeah. All right. So I mean, there's like tons of cards we could talk about. I did really want to mention the hybrid command cycle. That was actually an idea I had a while ago. I'm glad to see someone made them. And they're all based off the gods, so I'm assuming we're gonna get the other half soon. Um, which command is your favorite? I played the white black command in my last MCM tournament, which I have found a lot of fun. The card was actually just nerfed. Hasn't been changed here yet, but do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I do really like the white black one because I'm a simp for control decks. It's like everything that I want to use.
Hmm.
But personally, my favorite is the white blue one. Um, so it's probably a bit controversial, but I tend to I like when white gets some of blue's pie. I as a control player, like I don't particularly like playing blue very much. I prefer to play things like white black or Mardu or whatnot. And those tend to do pretty poorly against decks that are like just trying to outvalue you by sticking a bunch of card draw effects in them. They can just ignore what you're doing despite you having like a ton of interaction, like the best interaction possible. So I like to give white, in particular, but also like just motor colors in general, ways of combating those like super greedy control decks, which is what I've done with the final mode on Lao Shang's command. It's kind of like a one-off arms collector, I believe the card is named, where if your opponent is doing a bunch of card draw, then like white philosophically is all about sharing that. And so it sees your opponent like going super greedy, and it's like, you know what, we're gonna balance the scales, and I'm gonna match you with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card. There's three effects that may be somewhat contentious in white, but I personally am okay with all of them. So, um, yeah, I don't really have too big of an issue with it. Um, the most interesting thing to me is actually that it gives all creatures -2, -0, not just your opponents. So that actually might lead to some strange combat scenarios where like you want to use this as a combat trick, but it doesn't actually work. Um, that's kind of one of the just something I'm noticing now, I guess.
Yeah, part of that was obviously space because the commands get quite texty, but
Yeah.
also there was like some a bit more contention with like is it impi for white? like to give a non-symmetrical power debuff. And I thought the command is sort of doing enough controversial stuff that I was just like, we'll just simplify this one, give
Yeah,
it
that's a good point.
keep it symmetrical.
All right. Cool. So I think we went over all of the individual cards that I was like really burning to talk about. There's a cycle of mythic, legendary dragons, but honestly, we see so many of those. Not that those cards are boring by any means, but I'm just like, you kind of know what to expect a lot of the time.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's plenty of other sets, both canon and custom, where you can find that kind of thing. So anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about. Is there anything you didn't get to mention that you wanted to discuss for Panxiou?
Well, in terms of legendary dragons, you don't often see a cycle where the green one does not have flying. So if you're looking for a cycle of legendary dragons that obeys the pie, here you go.
Yeah, honestly, personally, that never offended me, but for the people who it does offend, I'm sure they appreciate it.
Yeah.
uh, yeah. Anything else?
No, you pretty much covered everything I wanted to talk about.
Sweet. Well, if you want to, see more of Poncho, you can again. I'll have the link in the description. If you want to play with these cards, there is a custom format where you can, play with them and other custom sets like this. So you can go. I'll include a link to that too. Thank you so much for joining me, Scribble. Really appreciate your insight. And yeah, I've just really had fun talking about this. I can't do an
Awesome.
outro to save my life.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, just I'm super honored whenever people want to talk about my stuff because this is just yeah, just my main hobby. It's something that I love doing. I want to do really well. So to finally make it into a format is just really flattering. And then yeah, I always appreciate your insight. So respect you as a designer. To be on your podcast again is always a fun time.
Yeah, thank you. And just as a player, as a person, this is one of my favorite custom sets I've ever seen. Particularly the flavoring. I also really love the pack mechanic, obviously, and the different ways you've kind of built the set around that. So just as a player, this is definitely top five for me.
Well, to be fair, like Pack, the mechanic, and kind of the set itself is kind of thanks to you. I was feeling really demoralized when I got eliminated from Survivor based off of it. So I probably would not have revisited it if not for you messaging me to tell me that it actually had potential.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I will happily take credit where it may or may not be due. So anyway, thanks a lot, Scribble. See you later.
Thanks, Dodger. Take care.